I now firmly believe that the increased radiation we're living in from radio and TV and radars and appliances compared to the turn of the century is contributing to our background rates of ill health.
The evidence shows that there's a causal link between the radiation and alteration of cellular tissue in the brain.
The research indicates that there is no significant scientific nexus between the use of cellular phones and a variety of different health effects that have been investigated since.
People who sell mobile phones are making a positive assertion of safety or zero risk. That just cannot be done.
Since 1975 in the United States, there's been a 25% increase in brain tumors. Worldwide, there's been a 300% increase in brain tumors.
Over millions of years, life has evolved on an Earth where the natural background level of radio frequency radiation, or RFR, has been very low. Then, starting only 100 years ago, the explosion in wireless technologies like radio, TV, radar, and microwave has boosted our everyday RFR exposure levels by at least 10,000 times. Our bodies and each of the cells within them are like antennas, extremely sensitive receivers and emitters of electromagnetic radiation. Now they must function in a new electromagnetic environment that already has 10,000 times more RFR than the one in which they evolved. And today, a new wireless revolution is in progress, with the number of cell phones, communication satellites, microwave antennas, and cell phone towers multiplying daily. That means even more RFR exposure for all of us. Not surprising, then, that around the world, growing numbers of citizens, scientists, and public officials are beginning to ask, just what are the human health and environmental effects of the wireless revolution? Isn't it about time we find out?
The Northern California Cancer Center has been tracking this since the 70s. The report came out to the public about 5 years ago that in Marin County we had the highest rate of breast cancer in the world, they said at the time, but certainly in the United States as far as we know. I'm the founder and executive director of Marin Breast Cancer Watch. We were founded 4.5 years ago, about 6 months after I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and asked the question, why does Marin County have the highest rate? Of course, the question was, how could this be possible when it's such a beautiful place and everybody's so health conscious and exercises and eats organic and does all the things that are supposed to make you very healthy? I mean, we've been told that it's because we're rich, white, and educated, and for some reason, we prefer not to believe that that's true. We want to find out what is true. So we're going ahead and starting our own survey. We do have an epidemiologist who's a volunteer who's working with us. We're just beginning to do this, and it's very, very exciting. My hunches are the military. During the Second World War, we were ringed by radar stations. There was also a very large radar station on top of Mount Tam, which is probably still in operation. And because there are many, many wealthy people living here, they can afford all the toys that everybody wants. And we've got them all right here. The cell phones are all over the place. Not to mention the microwaves and all the rest of it. So we've surrounded ourselves with toxicity, and we're paying the price.
People are getting sick. And then they bring this proposal to put up a new public safety system, which was designed by Motorola. It's called the Marin Emergency Radio Authority, MIRA. And that will add 17 more facilities on the hilltops throughout Marin, and it will add to the radiation background. Now, remember, we already have the highest rates of breast cancer, the highest rates of prostate cancer. We're already concerned about our health, and this is yet another layer.
We've heard a lot of questions about radio frequencies and their effects, and tonight we have an expert who will be meeting with us.
How much of an increase in the radio waves we receive would this create for the average San Rafael citizen?
If you are any distance from these sites, the increase is going to be insignificant, probably unmeasurable.
Okay, then I will call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. I think this is a substantial move forward for public safety in our county.
We're not against public safety. We just don't want this to cause more health problems. You know, there was a study recently done on Cape Cod where they found that in 45% of all the cases of breast cancer, the women had lived near radio or TV towers. So we are therefore doing a map. We're going to put it on computer. It's going to be interactive, and we're going to identify all the sites of licensed wireless facilities so we can identify them by frequency, by power density, and relative altitude, longitude, latitude. So we can calculate the exposure conditions to the nearby communities and compare the epidemiology study results that are being done by the Marin Breast Cancer Watch to see whether these facilities, in addition to what else is already there, may be causing harm. Right across the Golden Gate in San Francisco, there is a huge 990-foot tower called Sutro Tower. It has nearly 200 antennas there already, and there are proposals to add to that infrastructure and build in HD TV antennas. Scientists say that it's very possible that residents far below and homes across the bay could also be affected by a radiating tower that's this complex that sends signals quite a distance.
I'm so glad that this conference is being held in a church, and it's being held in this church. This is my church, and 2.5 years ago there was a proposal to put a cell tower up on the cupola. Well, it didn't go up there. It took about 7 months for people to decide not to put it there, but in the process we learned a lot about this issue. And having the conference here 2.5 years later helps to confirm that we are making progress in getting other people to pay attention to this issue so wise public policy decisions can be made.
Electromagnetic fields are intrinsic to us. They are in us. We can measure them. Our heartbeat. You have the ECG. They are in us. They are us. They are our intelligence. They are our cells. The body is an antenna. So you absorb the radiation in proportion to the resonance between your body size and the optimal aerial. People find it difficult to understand how a very small magnetic field could change cell behavior when the Earth's magnetic field is so powerful. But the difference is the Earth's magnetic field in which our ancestors were living is a static field. When you take a field and you oscillate it, then cells that are changing with time have this oscillating field imposed on them, then that's what changes the behavior. We have 23 studies now showing epidemiologically increased brain tumour in EMR-exposed people. 4 of them only show increases in cancer. 19 show statistically significant increase in cancer, and 5 show dose-response relationships. That is a causal set of data. Where careful studies have been carried out near high-powered facilities, an increase in a wide range of cancers has been found. The most prevalent is leukemia, and a whole range of leukemias, from myeloid leukemias, lymphatic leukemias. But the class of leukemias is often found. It's found in military personnel who are exposed to radar and radio. It's found in ham radio operators. It's found in children who live near a transmission tower in Hawaii. It's found in the US Embassy in Moscow.
The Russians, between 1953 and 1976, irradiated with radio frequency the personnel of the US Embassy in Moscow. It wasn't clear why they decided to do this. And it wasn't until the ambassador came down with leukemia, and then a second ambassador who replaced him later came down with leukemia, that serious attention was felt, and samples of blood were taken and sent back to the U.S., and they were found to show increased frequency of DNA abnormalities, a failure to reproduce. The radiofrequency sickness syndrome, which the Russians felt was one of the bases for their health protection guidelines, which were much lower than in the West, was reproduced in the embassy staff according to the criteria that were used in the survey. So one of the mysteries of the Cold War, why did the Russians irradiate the U.S. embassy, could be answered because they wanted to produce this interference with the ability to concentrate, the ability to sleep, the ability to think, which were aspects of the radiofrequency sickness syndrome, which they defined previously under experimental conditions. And they succeeded not only in doing it, but they succeeded in getting the U.S. leading epidemiologists to document it and then ignored it.
What is adequate evidence for decision making? Well, it depends on who you are. For the scientist, in order to come up with conclusive scientific evidence, which is a very high standard of evidence, we're looking at almost 100% certainty that an effect occurs. But is this the right forum, and is this the right level of evidence that we need to make decisions if we are a city or county that is mandated to protect public health and safety under the state zoning codes? We don't need that much evidence at all, do we? You know, the legal standard may be something down here. Maybe we only have to be about 51% certain, the more likely than not test. But we take action with less information and with less certainty. Now, under the California Environmental Quality Act, all we have to have is the potential for a significant impact, don't we? Anytime you see an environmental impact report, we're not looking for certainty of effect. 10 to 30% certainty is enough to take an action that is protective of public health. This is where we're operating when we talk about public decision making for cell siting, not over here. Do we have enough scientific evidence to be 10 to 30% certain that we may have an effect, and should we be careful? And do we do that for every other environmental constraint? You bet we do.
Radio frequency exposures began during the Second World War with the introduction of radar. The people who were exposed were mostly soldiers, some people in industry that were making products that were sold to the Army and Air Force. And the evidence that was accumulated showed evidence of effects on blood counts, evidence of effect on mutation and cellular reproduction, cataract in the eye, occurrence of headache and fatigue, and some increase in cancer. This occurred within a few decades of the discovery of radar, and the data were not very widely disseminated, and partly that's because people weren't concerned about what might happen in 25 years to technicians who were exposed at that time. They were fighting a war. And part of the problems that we have today derives from that rather realistic but not very sensitive preoccupation.
The United States permits some of the greatest levels of exposure to human populations in the world. If you compare those standards to other countries in Europe and China and Russia, you will note that the standards are much lower. They're all looking at the same science base. So why is there such a difference?
The spectrum goes all the way from extra low frequency, 60 hertz power fields that give us electricity, all the way up through radio waves, microwaves, and the communication frequencies, and then on over into the visible light, and then further than that, we're into ionizing radiation or X-rays and gamma rays. And in the old days, we used to think only the ionizing radiation part of the spectrum was carcinogenic or had the potential to cause cancer. Well, we're finding that that was maybe too arbitrary a delineation, and now we're seeing that we may have carcinogenic effects down in the lower frequency ranges. And we're talking about power, and we're talking about communication, wireless communication.
I moved out of California up to Washington State after Dynasty because I wanted some fresh air. I wanted to live where they had clean water, and I just liked the whole environmental state of Washington. I really love it up there. I'm very happy. But I've had some interesting experiences since I moved up there. They're going to put up a cell tower right near our house, like less than half a mile. It's going to be loaded with unlimited Whipson antennas. Now, 300 feet, and the extra 15 are for the Whipson antennas, is 40 feet less than the Space Needle in Seattle. This is not exactly something we're going to be able to ignore. How is this possible? I mean, here we are today in this age, and we have resources, and we can say all the things that need to be said, but we didn't know what needed to be said. We were ignorant. We went to the hearing passionate, and it didn't mean anything what we said. They said, well, these are all health issues, this doesn't really count, and so, okay, we lost. My intention is to let the American public know we have no rights, which is a frightening thing.
The FCC has the regulatory power over telecommunication facilities through the Telecommunications Act of 1996. What local governments have control over, what we have the authority to do, is only to regulate the placement, the construction, and the design of telecommunication facilities. We are prohibited from taking into consideration the health and safety impacts of those antennas.
So what do you want the government to do?
Well, firstly, I need the laws to be changed, because what we found out is that the public really doesn't have much of a chance against the Telecommunications Act. The way that it is structured, very few people will be able to beat it. What I want the American public to know is that they've got to have knowledge and information. That's why seminars like this are so important. If we had had the knowledge, we could have fought a better battle and perhaps stopped this. And I have a lawyer, I mean, I have resources. I can just imagine what the average American is going to come up against when they try to fight this, if this is going to go in my backyard.
They came to our neighborhood and put up a tower about 1 year ago, and we've all been fighting it because it's just been a blight on our neighborhood. We've been working on a moratorium within Butte County, and they've adopted the strongest ordinance in the United States. And we're hoping the city of Chico will follow suit, and so will other cities and areas.
If Pacific Bell can afford to advertise at $1 million+ a year, as they are here by this wonderful stadium, they can certainly afford to take the time and the money to locate cellular phone towers in places other than in neighborhoods. The Telecommunications Act of 1996, Section 704, provides that we can't do anything about the health risks, according to the Congress. But the local governments are still allowed to determine where to locate the towers within reason. In fact, what the law says is the only prohibition is that the local government cannot prohibit the tower altogether. All we're asking is for Pac Bell Wireless to be a good neighbor and not to put cell towers over 100 feet tall in the middle of neighborhoods, especially trying to take advantage of people in the Central Valley who they think are stupid and poor.
We think that we have to work with people across the state and across the nation in order to protect them from predators like Pac Bell Wireless.
The only thing that communities can do is write an ordinance, and that takes time, and usually it's only after a disaster has happened, like in our community. We were successful in lobbying our public officials for a county ordinance, but it's too late for us.
It appears to me that the time has come for a precautionary note in this process. 25,000 of these cell phones are being sold a day. Tens of millions of people around the earth are using them. And there is substantial question as to whether or not health studies have been done adequately. What this legislation does is bring some consumer confidence back by trying to assure our consumers that consumers have what all consumers need and have a right to in the marketplace, which is accurate information and choice.
Each of these phones must meet stringent emission standards set by the FCC in concert with the IEEE and a number of the other engineering organizations. The levels that they meet are far below, I mean, the emission standards are far below any levels even close to causing any kind of a biological effect, much less an adverse health effect.
In the summer of 1998, I had taken a job working for a startup company that was manufacturing the next generation of cellular phones. I went to work for this company as the director of worldwide sales. After a couple months, we were issued these prototype cell phones. Most of the employees in the company were issued the phones, and we were told to use them and test them and evaluate them. That's what we did for several months. I used that phone daily. The phone is designed to be operated with your thumb in a one-handed fashion. Being right-handed, I always held the phone on my right side. In early 1999, I had a seizure that was later diagnosed as a cancerous brain tumor. A mass growing in my head that was 5.5 centimeters by 5.5 centimeters, about the size of a tennis ball. The speed with which the tumors can grow is amazing. Cancerous tumors are rated on a scale of 1 to 4, and 4 being the fastest growing tumor. And a grade 4 tumor can grow from the size of a grape to the size of a tennis ball in 2 months. And mine was graded between a 2 and a 3, so we're guessing that mine probably took somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 months to grow, which would coincide with about the period that I was using the cell phone. I now believe that the phone was the culprit in at least triggering my brain tumor to occur. My brain tumor occurred right on the right side of my head, right on the temple, right where I held the phone.
What does the 1.6 watts per kilogram mean for the public? It's basically a safety limit, and it's a safety limit which has been developed by consensus of the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, NIOSH, and the National Institutes of Health. And it has substantial safety factors in it, 50-fold safety factors that provide assurances that these products are safe.
I think all of us here in the community don't want to see 10 years down the line a situation like with tobacco.
We've collected credible scientific evidence from around the world that reports study after study of health effect or bioeffect at lower than standard levels. If this bar represents the standard, what is allowable, look at where these studies fall in terms of health effects reported at lower levels. Sometimes if you just put this on in front of a decision maker and say, well, you know, maybe we don't have conclusive evidence, but we have all these studies and they're all talking about health effects down here. and here's the standard. You know, something must be wrong. Maybe we should be careful. Maybe we shouldn't put this in the middle of a school ground, or maybe we shouldn't put it in the middle of a residential neighborhood, or maybe we shouldn't put it anywhere near people until we have a lot more evidence.
We found that cells inside the brain, after exposure to radio frequency radiation, have DNA damage. And these are so-called strand breaks. The DNA basically breaks up into pieces.
This is what's called a comet assay, DNA comet assay. The length of the comet tail there is quite long. All of those fragments represent broken DNA. Now what's important is that the FCC limit here is 1.6 watts per kilogram, SAR. Here we've only got 0.6 and here we've got 1.2. So these are still below standard. You know, conventional wisdom has that there should be no effect. They are clearly breaking DNA and or interfering with DNA repair.
In my experiment, I only expose animals for a short time. Now then the question is asked, what happens if you're exposed to radiation from, for example, from a cell tower? Of course, it's a long-term exposure. So the main question is, will the effect accumulate over time? Now there's some indication that they accumulate. So a long-term exposure to a low intensity may have the same effect as a short-term 1 or 2 hour exposure for high intensity.
Our office is located on the 3rd floor of an office building with another building just about 150 feet away that's at the same elevation as our office. It's 3-story. And it is now the home of 28 cell phone and PCS antennas that sit on the top of this building. They are hidden behind a skirt or parapet on the top. Nevertheless, they radiate their radio frequency radiation directly through that and across the buildings in front of us, and the side lobe of those antennas hits this building. When we were unsuccessful in asking the county to consider another location for these antennas, we measured to find out what kind of radio frequency exposure we have here. We bought a small detector to measure the fields, and then we looked for solutions that we could put in place. And these solutions turned out to be a combination of shielding with fabric over the windows, which is actually silver mesh, and it does block radio frequency radiation. To handle the problem outside of the window areas, we purchased a special kind of paint that is copper-based, copper fleck paint, and that paint reflects radio frequency. It keeps it outside for the most part. So with a combination of painting and putting up curtains, we were able to reduce the radio frequency inside the office. So it's not perfect, but it does a fairly good job in comparison to no shielding. This is a scientific study that shows the absorption of cell phone energy or radio frequency radiation into a head. These are phantom heads, but they are used to measure the absorption of radio frequency. This is an adult head. You'll notice how much, here's the ear canal over here, and the yellow color indicates a lot of radio frequency is being absorbed, and then you can see how the profile of energy goes into the brain. That's an adult. Now this skull is a 10-year-old child. Look how much more the radio frequency radiation penetrates the child's head, a 10-year-old. And this is a 5-year-old's head. And again, look now at the amount of penetration of radio frequency into the head. These children are absorbing more energy with the same phone call than an adult ever would. The reason is that their head size is smaller and more resonant with the wavelength of the cell phone frequency. It's just amazing and irresponsible that we saw such heavy merchandising of cell phones to children this last Christmas.
It's so sad, the idea that kids have to have a cellular telephone that they shove up against a growing head. I wouldn't let my child go out and play in the traffic. I'm not going to give my child a cell telephone to put up against her head.
We live in a two-storey home. It's a new home, along with 7 other families in houses next to this building. And because it's a two-storey home, the roof of the building is 35 feet above the ground level, and it means the antenna arrays will point directly line of sight into our family room, our daughter's bedroom, and the same thing for all of our neighbours. Okay, so this is my daughter's bedroom, and the view through her blinds onto the adjacent building, which is a Pac Bell building, where next term would like to put its 12-element ASMR array. They have a mock-up, so let us see how un-ugly it is. It's very ugly. And you can see there's some existing cellular structures from Pac Bell and Sprint behind the tree on the right, and the new elements of the array you can see on the rooftops. We had 2 letters from realtors saying property values will drop 10% to 12% if we can sell them. My main reason is health. I've a lot of health concerns. My background as a physicist and electronics engineer is one of health. I feel the studies are weak. There's enough evidence to say it's dangerous. And with my daughter 150 feet from the rooftop, the radiation field outside is well within the compliance limit, but not in any realistic safety level for a doctor or medical person.
This is a senior community centre, just less than a block away from the Pac Bell. In fact, it's right next to it. And there's a children's playground behind there. There's lots of senior programs, children's dance classes. Basically, people use this senior centre. It's a community centre, so it's used a lot, and it just goes to amaze me how companies don't care.
Anyone who's a parent or has had a child would not want this to happen to their child, even if they could tolerate this happening to their brain.
This is a responsible public health solution, not based on knowing all the facts, but based on the question, is it safe? And if it's not safe, until we find out for sure, let's take precautionary steps. It gives the industry an opportunity to come to the table and help find solutions. We need the research. We're concerned the Motorola and the other companies that finance research are going to spend the science. In fact, we think this has already been happening.
When I moved to California, Southern California, the 60 hertz work that we did was supported by a contract from the Department of Energy. The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers. I said, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola, and I got a call from Mays Swycord at Motorola. Now, Mays is the former head of the Center for, CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, and he left the FDA and went to work for Motorola. Keep that connection in mind. That's interesting. He also handpicked his successor at the FDA. Anyhow, Mays didn't like the work. Then there was another phone call. Point is, I kept getting nothing from these people. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study. They didn't tell me not to. They just said, no, this isn't ready for publication. And they wanted me to do more work. I stopped taking calls from them, and I went ahead and published the study. It came out in 1998, and I wanted nothing more to do with any Motorola-related work. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of control. I wouldn't put up with that attitude. That was it. I think one has to exercise caution at this point. And what makes the cellular telephone research area so difficult right now is there is no money available for research other than that's coming from industry. So, I mean, what does this do? I don't have any faith in what comes out. I have absolutely none, not with my dealings with industry so far.
In the case of tobacco, it's not possible by what is known as scientific standards to establish that the individual cigarette you're smoking is the one that caused the lung cancer that you developed. And I think it's sufficient by scientific evidence if you establish an association. Now you're at the limits of science, and we have established an association. To say, well, it's only an association, and you can't show me a dead body and the cell phone, the smoking cell phone that caused the brain cancer, is a preposterous industry argument. This is what Motorola now says in its safety section when they put out a manual on their cell phones. Do not, and that's in large capital letters, hold the unit such that the antenna is in contact with exposed parts of the body, especially the face or eyes or ear, while the unit is turned on. So we're not talking about a hypothetical problem. That's where we are now in the company's own advisory language. Honest people can disagree, I think, on the extent of the risk. The extent of the association, I think, is pretty clear. There's an association. But what really angers me, where I have a much stronger opinion, is the corrupting influence of corporate money on science, the buying of science.
In the case of cellular telephones, we're looking at a multi-billion-dollar industry that will only grow over the coming years. Look at the money that's at stake for these people. It's absolutely staggering. Now, what does it mean to buy a study to ensure that your billions and billions of dollars are going to be safe?
Well, I don't want to overreact, but I'm concerned about the stories I've been hearing about electronic radiation. Does anyone really know what the effects are? What do the experts say?
I've been studying the effects of electromagnetic energy for several years and have performed detailed measurements of the radio frequency emissions from cellular telephone transmission systems. First, let me put your concerns into perspective. Basically, when we talk about electromagnetic energy from cellular systems, we are talking about the same general type of transmissions that radio and television use, only significantly less powerful. Despite the considerable amount of information obtained from laboratory research and epidemiological studies, the scientific community has not identified any significant health impact from living in environments where radio and television broadcasts occur around the clock. These systems and their related microwave point-to-point communications link play a vital role in obtaining and receiving urgently needed information. In fact, we have a facility very similar to this one operating right here at UC Davis Medical Center.
The bottom line really is that, yes, RFR exposure is associated with damage to DNA. The scientific literature also documents the exquisite sensitivity of the brain to radio frequency radiation, and Senator Hayden has also mentioned this. Now, all of these studies provide a reason for concern, and I think they provide justification for action, and it's for that reason that I support and ask your support for Senator Hayden's bill.
Each year, including this year, over 100,000 people will be diagnosed in the United States with a brain tumor, either metastatic or primary. And brain tumors now have the dubious distinction of being the second leading cancer killer of children under the age of 19. Further study is warranted. In fact, the International Agency for Research on Cancer has decided to conduct a 9-country study of whether cell phones cause brain tumors. While it's not clear at this moment whether cell phones cause brain tumors, what is clear is the growing public concern.
I'd really like to speak.
I worked in the industry for 2.5 years, and I was diagnosed with a brain tumor in February of 1999.
I was a specialist, a cellular specialist, and known and recognized in the industry. If you had any problems, go take it to that girl. And Dr. Joyce came on and he says, you know, honey, sometimes one thing leads us to find another. And he said, you have a brain tumor. There's such a big cover-up on this because of money.
It's very, very difficult, as you know, to prove cause and effect when it comes to the energy modalities. The brain tumors are probably going to begin, they probably already are, beginning to show up in cell phone users. It's going to take probably 10 to 15 years for it to show up in those who live near the cell towers, more than likely. And then it's going to take another 2 years to gather the data. It's going to take another 3 years for peer review. It's going to take another 4 years to end up in the journals. So we're 20 years away from holding this industry accountable. In the meantime, you do the math, there's billions of dollars at stake there that they're going to rake in, and they very cynically know how long it's going to take to prove this.
The industry has in fact engaged in the research, and it's funded a tremendous amount of research since the early 90s.
And what does that research indicate?
The research indicates that there is no significant scientific nexus between the use of cellular phones and a variety of different health effects that have been investigated, Senator.
I would just like to highlight one issue that has not been raised to date, and that is that every federal agency that has examined this issue has determined, and I quote, that the scientific evidence does not demonstrate any adverse health effects associated with the use of mobile phones. And that statement is from the FDA as recently as October of 1999.
The FDA has said, after all these years, that they can't certify that the technology is safe or not safe. It seems to me when you've got 25,000 of these cell phones being purchased a day, the fact that the FDA cannot certify them as safe should be cautionary.
You know, your people say something, these people say something else, and I'm not going to determine who is right and who is wrong. However, I do want to hold the industry's feet to the fire. I'll say this very, very clearly, that there is obviously some research out there that indicates that there might be some problems in terms of medical outcomes.
Senator, do you have our commitment that we'll certainly work on the concept? We have to see the details, obviously, but we'll certainly be responsive.
All right, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Senator Solis. Secretary, please call the roll.
Escutia.
Aye.
Escutia, aye. Haynes. Vasconcelos.
Aye.
Vasconcelos, aye.
Measure passes.
The truth is, I think we barely got that bill out of committee
Yeah.
because industry was just beating on people.
One of my hopes for the conference was to bring together scientists from all over the world as well as public health experts, because to give a recommendation about safety levels for electromagnetic fields, it's not only a question for the scientists, it's also a question for the public health authorities. So we have to bring them together to protect the public health.
The public is concerned all over the globe, and it is now recognized all over the world that it might be possible to considerably lower the limits of exposure.
Citizens are worldwide concerned and claiming for their democratic rights, and telecommunication industry has to understand that their users have democratic rights which have to be observed.
The information we have in Japan is so much behind compared with the Scandinavian or European countries. And at the moment, about 46% of population, which is 57 million people using mobile phone, now quickly penetrating into younger generation. And even at the moment, high school students are using this mobile phone. At the pace we are increasing, then in the future, the younger generation in 10 years' time will be damaged.
Microwave sensitivity has become a major problem in later years, since the mobile telephone systems were built out in Sweden, you know. That was about 96, 97 that we had all those 3 different systems in Sweden, and now practically everything is covered. Stockholm is called the Silicon Valley of Europe. That was Bill Gates, I think, who said that, because of the Swedish economy, of course, because we depend on our telecommunication systems, and the company Ericsson, it's very big, and also there is a great deal of innovation. You know, there are many small companies who are creating these wireless systems, all types of things. You know, there's so much technological development there, and so it's very exciting, all these new things, and very good money, but some people get sick. One of the most well-known cases, Mr. Per Segerbäck, he's been electrosensitive, I think, since the beginning of the 90s, and he's an engineer at Ericsson.
The reason I'm wearing this is it protects me against microwave radiation. It contains about 25% stainless steel. The reason I'm wearing it right now is because you're making a film and interviewing me. I can't stand the radiation from the camera. Otherwise, the main purpose of the suit is to enable me to get to work, because the microwave radiation here in Sweden, especially in the Stockholm area, is just too high. I can't stand it. It will turn me unconscious in 10 minutes or so.
He's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, you know, and he has helped me, for instance, a lot in finding scientific publications, references, abstracts, and so on. And he's very, very clever, and therefore it's very, very sad at the same time to see him having these terrible problems, you know.
The main symptoms are from the nervous system. What happens to me personally is I just drop down on the ground, and I can't move, I can't talk, I don't see anything, I don't hear. I'm turned off. It started with working in front of my computer, but I was also actually working only about 30 or 40 yards away from a mobile base station. Where I sat, I looked out the window, I saw these antennas. I was the manager of a group of designers, but they came from all over the world. Smokers, non-smokers, vegetarians, meat eaters, you name it. And around 80 to 90% of my personnel developed hypersensitivity to electricity within 1 year. And we have nothing in common, we were not related in any way. To me that says that, well, if the conditions are bad enough, we're all going to get problems.
If you go back some years in the Swedish debate, it was very popular to claim that these persons only imagine this, or they have some psychological disease or whatever, but that has never been found.
The Swedish government has accepted electrosensitivity as a disability.
it doesn't really matter whether you feel anything or not. It has been shown by Olle Johansson at the Karolinska Institute here in Sweden that actually anyone who sits in front of a computer gets sudden changes in the skin.
There are sometimes even heavy alterations, including changes in different immune competence cells such as Langerhans cells, and in the mast cells, which is the key cells for things like allergies, oversensitivities, asthma, that kind of things. Pointing to that they react as they would react to any kind of irradiation such as X-rays or radioactivity. They also seem to react to something coming from the computer screen. But then we have also focused attention on the mobile telephones, and we're actually the first group in the world to show that persons claiming such a sensitivity could mimic that in a double-blind experiment. And they could do this sensitivity, and that it was real actually. Is it really good then to whole body irradiate 24 hours a day? Of course not. And also then a recommendation would be that please, if not stop, at least diminish the use as much as possible until we can say that everything is safe. And today we just cannot say that. On the contrary, there are so much knowledge nowadays, and they're all pointing like a forest in the wind in the same direction towards that there are biological effects, there are risk effects, and some of the effects are even scary.
According to official statistics, it's around 2% of the Swedish population that are hypersensitive. That translates to about 180,000 people.
I think a prudence avoidance principle is probably not enough. Maybe you would have to live with the thought that either you have to stop this kind of usage, or at least start inventing what I usually call human-friendly technology.
It should be possible to find frequencies, modulation techniques, etc., that do not affect people as much as the current systems. You can actually have an area that are free from base stations and where the levels are fairly low. Turn off a number of the base stations and turn the antennas the other way, and have an area where you have only outdoor coverage. Even out here where the levels are around 1,000 times lower than in Stockholm, your mobiles can work just fine outdoors. So if you're satisfied with using your wired phone indoors and only using the mobile while outdoors, that should do it.
We believe that we have some natural protection to microwaves, radio and TV waves, power frequent waves and so on, things that were invented during the last century. And of course we do not have such a natural protection. And maybe there the problem lies, you know.
All these companies, they develop just gadgets and toys, and they don't really understand health issues at all. They are engineers and they understand the technical issues. So health issues must be handled by scientists and politicians, I think.
I think it was a very successful conference, and as a result we have the Salzburg Declaration with a lot of recommendations to the public, to the authorities, but also to the network providers.
The Salzburg Resolution is really going to raise the world standard for considering how to deal with low-level radio frequency radiation from communications, and also, very importantly, from the coming wireless internet. If you think that the levels of radio frequency radiation that we have from cell phones and communications is important enough to consider today, wait until you see what might happen when we dramatically increase the amount of information or electrosmog in the atmosphere related to wireless internet. I believe that it's One of the most important public debates we could have on the planet today. This has not been a public debate yet. The technology and the industry have run far ahead, building, planning, but not talking to the public. And this is not correct. We need to open this debate about high tech and whether or not there is high risk and whether or not we choose this as our future.
I went to Stanford back in the 70s. I was never in a demonstration. I was a good student. I just put my head down and kept doing my work. Well, a month ago, I was out there marching with children and mothers and some fathers, doing the Mother's March to deliver a petition signed by 2,500 people, which is now 3,000 people, opposing this super tower on Lookout Mountain and telling Jefferson County, look, we do not give our consent to further radiation. This is an assault on us. We do not give our consent. It's a continuing abatable nuisance. What does that mean? You see this device going on here right now? That's radiation coming in and striking us. Each day is a new assault. Each day is a new battery. Each day is a new right of action to sue the people who hurt you. Once these things get put up, you have to fight like crazy to avoid them adding more and more and more and more. And apparently they're going to just keep adding more until people start dropping like flies, unless we fight it.